Released in January 1998, Gods and Monsters kind of slipped in a little bit to get a little bit of Oscar recognition. Pretty much it got more when it got Oscar recognition. Then people are like, "Oh, what is this movie?" It's one of those like, "Oh, okay, we never really heard about it." It was a really like a late entry kind of a film.
Well, and it's a movie that's very peculiar in how you market it too, because it's from the director of Candyman 2. So it's like that's not a great like initial starting point. But then you also have Ian McKellen, who was kind of getting another resurgence with like things like Apt Pupil. You get Brendan Fraser, who is the Encino Man guy. It's like, how do you market this movie?
Very unorthodox kind of a setup. So today we're going to talk about another Brendan Fraser film that I think people should kind of tune into. It's Gods and Monsters. We're going to try to keep our shirt on when we talk about
this. Welcome back to the show, everyone. I'm one of your hosts, Kyle Goethe from GoatFilmReviews.com.
I'm Nick from the St. Paul Filmcast. Thanks for finding us. Thanks for watching. And yes, you guessed it. Thank you. Sincerely, thank you for our support from our loyal fans. Hey, we do have a Patreon. Check that out for some great deals and a lot of good content only for Patreon members.
Yeah.
We just load up a bunch of new content for that exclusive.
Yeah, tons of episodes of The Road to De Palma, our exclusive De Palma series. We've got Picks with Kyle and Nick, which has a number of really fun actor-driven episodes recently. And then, of course, you get to, if you're a part of the $5 tier and up, you get to pick some of the movies we talk about, which, gosh, that sounds like fun. I wish I could do that.
Yeah. Also, please leave a like and subscribe. Tell your friends about the show.
Yeah, definitely. And today what we're talking, Gods and Monsters, from director Bill Condon. In this fictionalized account of Frankenstein director James Whale's final days, the retired and reclusive filmmaker connects and bonds with his gardener, Clay Boone. Through their developing friendship, Whale begins to recount memories of his movie career that had washed away due to stroke. But each man has different interpretations of their connection.
So this is adapted screenplay by Bill Condon, if I remember.
Yeah, he did win the Academy Award for adapted screenplay. Was also nominated for lead actor and supporting actress. And he adapted it from the book Father of Frankenstein by Christopher Bram.
He also won an Academy Award for writing for the film Chicago, which won Best Picture in 2002. Bill Condon definitely started out with Strange Behavior. It's kind of like a psychological fantasy film. And then he would go on to do Sister Sister in 1987. Check that out. It's a really interesting movie. Psychological.
Not the show.
Not the show, the film, Sister. But then once he worked with Ian McKellen, they did a bunch of other movies after this one.
Yeah.
So they did Mr. Holmes, which kind of, I think, was laid the foundations of another same kind of template. What would be Mr. Holmes' life after he's aged and, almost like James Whale in this character.
It feels kind of like, almost like a Hook continuation where you get Peter Pan grown up. You have the Christopher Robin film about Christopher Robin grown up, and this is kind of like old age Sherlock Holmes, which is really a portion of that character we don't see that often. So. And
then recently he directed The Good Liar, based on the book The Good Liar, and Ian McKellen is in that one as well.
Yeah, he's great in it, even though the movie's not so great.
I think the book is far more interesting because you get her perspective.
Oh, okay.
And
you never really
halfway done,
with her,
you get his point of view. We don't really present the movie like that way. Bill Condon, when he does films, it's almost been trying to describe Bill Condon films. It's like he treats the subject matter very gentle, even though it's very almost dreamlike, but it's a very gentle things, even when it seems like it's very harsh.
Oh, okay.
Very takes care of things. I think you see in this movie, a lot of things are being, even the arrangements and delicately of how you treat the characters, even the characters treat each other sometimes is more delicate.
Yeah, I feel like with Condon, there's always that sense of love for what he's making. Like there's a real sense of, when he's making this film, especially with like the reenacting the flashback scenes from like Bride of Frankenstein, there's a love for that kind of movie. And I think even that's true of, say what you will about the Twilight franchise, he did make the two better Twilight films.
The last two of them, right?
Yeah, I thought that was a franchise where each one got steadily less bad as they went on. And he made the better two at the end, and I think you can see throughout those films that he has a definite love for the characters, and there's a love within the material. And the same is true of his Beauty and the Beast remake, which I think was an ultimately not great remake because it's the same movie, but what he adds to it does show a sense of love for it.
Yes, it's very, very much great care for the subject matter and the production as well as the homage to it. Gods and Monsters, it's hard to sell because it's about it's a fictional account of James Whale's last days, and then you have Brendan Fraser, who comes from a lot of screwball comedy kind of things. Even though we talked about School Ties, which is a little drama,
but he was never known for School Ties.
Yeah, he did like Airheads and Encino Man, and then even something like after this, like Blast of the Past, very George of the Jungle. And all
The Mummy was the next year, I believe it was '99, right? So
yeah,
so he hadn't even gotten to like stardom status. He hadn't done things like Bedazzled, which I think is a really fun comedy with him, or even like Monkey Bone, which is absurdist. Like neither one of those things had dropped yet, so it was really kind of like Encino Man, George of the Jungle.
That's what we recognize him from, right? Yeah. And then you have, which people I don't know were very familiar with, Ian McKellen. So you have this very much how do you market it, because it's not a comedy, but it's not really a serious drama. There's that in-between needle of where it is, because it's not really a lot of depth to this, but there's a lot of great care of filmmaking to it. So you have a lot of things of how do you sell this movie, and I think it's very hard to get an audience who doesn't really recognize the title, thinking they're going to get into a horror movie.
I actually purchased the film. I purchased it when Blockbuster was closing. It was one of the DVDs I grabbed off the shelf. I didn't know much about the movie. I grabbed it because it was Gods and Monsters. I'd heard the title, Ian McKellen, Brendan Fraser, looked like a horror film. And so I, eventually over the time of having it was like realized what the film is about. And I kept thinking like, what a great companion piece to another like fictionalized version of horror with like something like Shadow of the Vampire. From around the same time. Because again, it's not a real version of the events, but it is like for a horror fan, something to dive into. And I think maybe the marketing is what's wrong, is they should have maybe marketed this film to horror fans, people who love the Universal monsters. Yeah. And maybe they would have liked to see a drama based in that world.
Yeah. I agree. So the marketing for it, as well as just they knew they had a good catch for maybe the Oscar thing would gravitate and just sell it itself.
And as we all know, horror has not had a great relationship with the Oscars, so maybe that marketing would have hurt its Oscar chances.
Yeah, and this came out, I think, after App Pupil or before.
You're right about the same time.
Almost the same time. So now everybody through movies recognizes Ian McKellen.
Yeah, but even App Pupil didn't make money. It's kind of that issue of like the movies I think of Ian McKellen from the 80s and 90s. I think of things like The Keep, which was a bomb. No one saw it. I think of movies like App Pupil, which no one saw. Like it really was until X-Men. And then following it up with Lord of the Rings, Ian McKellen was not a name. You can't sell a movie on him, and I really think you can't really sell a movie on Brendan Fraser at that point either, or Lynn Redgrave for that matter.
And that was what kind of hurt getting out into the ether of people watching this movie. So, based on that, and then you have this content of James Whale, and I think people don't know very much about James Whale. And I think this is probably supposed to put a beam light on James Whale, because he did more than just Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein. He did like 30 films.
There's that kind of in McKellen's performance, there's that feeling that he both is really proud of his accomplishment with those two iconic films and also wants to be known for the other things too. It's almost like that I am not Spock, I am Spock thing that Leonard Nimoy went through for the longest time.
Yes.
Same kind of thing.
Same kind of thing. And then you have him kind of attached to somebody that's kind of ignorant to him. So it's a way that he can converse and kind of tell the old stories of going back, and it's fresh and new.
Yeah, and seeing Brendan Fraser's character Clay kind of go through, like almost fall in love with him as a filmmaker throughout the course of the film. In the bar watching the movie with all those people, and he has a genuine connection to the material.
And then they have like, oh, this looks hokey.
Yeah. Well, and then of course the irony of being in that scene too with Kevin J. O'Connor, who would be his co-star in The Mummy, playing Benny, his villainous character, but who would also go on to play Igor in Van Helsing, another version of Frankenstein.
Clever. So you have this very much, I would not say it's a character study film, but you have this very much a gentle process of people. And you have it mostly centered around James Whale, who has a disdain for his career, but also wants it being celebrated at the same time.
Yeah.
And you see the kind of a metaphor of the party. He wants to be recognized, but then at the same time, oh, please stay away from me. Yeah. Oh, you're the director. Oh, stop. Yeah.
Yeah, it's you can't have it both ways, or you can't have it neither way in his version. But it feels like he's kind of struggling within himself, and part of that might be due to the stroke, might be due to the fact that he doesn't have the same memory of his own life that other people have of his persona.
No.
But that's also interesting in that you're looking at this film. This film is very similar in some ways to the recent film Blonde that came out, in that they're both based on novel, fictionalized accounts rather than based on true events.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of it's a reconciliation that I'm not sure I've had yet, which is how do you tell someone as a viewer that this is not a true event, but it's how we might see an event.
Might see it. And I think Gus Van Sant tried this point of view with Kurt Cobain.
Oh yeah, was it The Last Days of
Something
Gus
like
Van
the last.
Sant? Yeah.
What's a fictional account of Kurt Cobain's last days alive before he committed suicide. And I think that's it's more. I think it's far more interesting. Like, what would he do?
Yeah.
And attached to this fictional guy who comes to just trim the hedges.
Well, and I'm a big proponent of make the movie you want to make. Yeah. Realistic facts be damned, make a movie that is worth watching as opposed to one that is 100% accurate. I do feel that there should be some delineation in your opening credits, either based on a true story for your biopics or make sure it's noted based on the novel, just so that your audience knows what to expect in the narrative. But yeah, I don't know. How do you feel about that?
It's hot. Yeah, you want something like this is based on the book by Christopher Bram. Because
Yeah.
that was celebrated, too. The book was actually celebrated.
Yeah.
And the title comes from the line from, I think, the first Frankenstein, the 31. We're in the new age of gods and monsters.
Oh, well, the line comes from Bride of Frankenstein. That's Dr. Pretorius says, to a new world of gods and monsters as he's toasting the prep work for the bride, and when we see the little person that he shrunk down and put inside the jar and all those kinds of things. So
but they got when they reenacted that scene with the Bride of Frankenstein, they got all these actors. It's
incredible, and I think particularly Dr. Pretorius. The actor's name escapes me, but the character Dr. Pretorius is such an iconic vision of my head. Like, I think of that more than I think of Colin Clive, and that version of the character, oh my God, is so darn close.
And for my opinion, Bride of Frankenstein is the better one. That's my opinion.
I can't answer that. I love them both. I can't.
But if you watch Young Frankenstein, a lot of what's in Bride of Frankenstein is lifted.
Oh yeah.
From to Young Frankenstein rather than Frankenstein.
Well, A New World of Gods and Monsters too. It's such an iconic line from that film. So much so that when we tried getting a rebooted Dark Universe in 2017 with The Mummy, that line even shows up in the trailer said by Russell Crowe is welcome to a new world of gods and monsters. Like, that is such a synonymous piece of that not even Frankenstein, universal horror.
Right. It's like their tagline.
Yeah, that it almost, it's a perfect title for this movie because it gets you that clue in,
All right. I think right now it's a perfect time to catch our review. This is kind of like my rediscovery of Gods and Monsters. So, technically, this is your first time seeing it, if I'm right? All right.
Is.
So, every time it's his first time seeing it, I always like to go to you automatically. What is your first reaction to Gods and Monsters?
I hated it. Wait.
Yeah.
Nope, I didn't. No, didn't hate it. I really liked it, actually, quite a bit.
Okay.
This is a movie that is made for me, though. Like, let's be honest. This is a movie that is a clue in. Frankenstein.
If you like the Universal horrors and you attach to it.
I think Frankenstein was the first Universal horror film I watched in its entirety. I had fallen in love with Creature from the Black Lagoon, but I couldn't find a copy of that movie. Frankenstein was the first one I ever saw. And while it's not my ultimate favorite one of the bunch, there's a certain nostalgic love for that because it's what brought me in. It's what made me want to go out and shell the money for all those other horror films.
But it's a great entry. Talk about not about this movie, but when the monster comes in the scene the first time, he's backwards.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't know how to open up the door.
Yeah.
And then he turns around and it's like, whoa!
Yeah. We didn't have that kind of a...
That's James Whale's kind of interesting little talent that he had. Like, how do we first see him? Let's see him go backwards and then turn.
Yeah. But I am happy that I knew going into the film that it was based on a novel. I think, again, like, that goes back to my argument. I want the audience to be aware of that because being aware of that allowed me a little bit more of a, I don't want to say fun vibe because the movie's not really fun, but like more of a ability to let the facts go and just kind of embrace this dream of what would happen. I think Ian McKellen is brilliant. But this character is also someone that's made for me. Even said
kind of forgets. Watching this, you kind of forget that it's not James Whale.
Yeah, but he says the same thing. He goes, we're both gay people in the film industry who've had to hide ourselves in our British lifestyle and struggles in that way. And it's like, yeah, it's kind of made for McKellen's performance. But you forget he's there. I actually, you don't realize Brendan Fraser's there too.
That's what I think
phenomenal.
Should have been recognized right away. I think he was very salty about being recognized. I think a lot of hurt because it is a great performance. It's one of those, yeah. But we're so used to doing the screwball comedy that I think it should have been something. You should have given it a little bit.
It's the same thing with like Adam Sandler. When you've made such a name for yourself doing these quirky, weird, silly characters, it is tough to break out of, and it's too bad because a lot of the times we find our best dramatic actors are the ones who are great with comedy because drama and comedy have so much there's so much tragedy in both.
I do like the hints of him having this dementia. Mm-hmm. It kind of sells into it. You can get into your movie magic when he's at the dinner party. All of a sudden, he sees himself being in World War I.
Yeah.
And it takes you out. It's very surreal, but it fits the movie perfectly because he doesn't remember this because he had a stroke. Is this? Am I dreaming this? Is this reality? It's almost like his brain shutting down. And of course, they show this. They make this made-up dream sequence of Brendan Fraser taking his brain out and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So it's almost like he's using Brendan Fraser as his own Frankenstein monster, trying to mold him to his perspective. And sometimes Brendan kind of stands like the Frankenstein monster in the movie, and then you're like, "Oh, am I?"
Yeah. Well, and Clay, who's an entirely fictional character, it should be noted. Yeah. Clay he's a physical brute, he's not, and not that he's a dumb guy, but he just isn't. He isn't educated.
And we get a fantastic background. We get that phone call with his family. We understand why he's out there all by himself.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think it's wonderfully crafted. I buy into all the performances. I think even who plays the bartender.
Lolita Davidovich?
Lolita. Yeah. It's fantastic. You have all these little snippets. And, of course, you have people playing real-life people like Princess Margaret, and she does that fantastic.
Yeah, there's a lot of care, and it goes back to what I said before. There's a lot of love in what Condon is doing with the film. He obviously loves the material he's working with. He loves the story he's telling, and there's really very little downright flaws. They're more like going back to if I had to nitpick, I would find nitpicks. But I really felt that overall the film was a beautiful love letter to a filmmaker, to a genre, and to that difficult break that we have as creatives. I think if you've ever had a creative bone in your body, you tend to lose that ability of reality, and that's what Whale is doing as his life comes to a close, as he's losing his grip on reality. That's and he's embracing the dream.
I do like they don't hit you over the head with it, but they don't shy away from it either.
Yeah,
it's the right temperament of that thing of he's losing the ability to draw, and you don't see it until he demonstrates. Well, this is the best I can do, and heck with it.
Yeah, and fun fact: there are several of James Whale's actual drawings of his subjects in the studio. Those actual props did make it in from it. So
I think this movie is another one of footnotes that people, especially in Hollywood, think James should be more celebrated than he actually is in real life.
Yeah,
there's a lot of contributions. A lot of talent there that he did with these Universal horror movies that people are recognizing nowadays a little bit more.
Yeah, and perhaps there is something to be said about this movie's impact on that. I know it wasn't a money maker, but it was. It's definitely. I have several books that were written in the 70s about the filmmaking process for Universal and for just horror in general. And it's crazy how many of them focus their energy on Todd Browning, the director of Dracula and Freaks, and that kind of a thing, and how much of the story is about him and what he did before Dracula and what he did after Dracula, but so little of it focuses on Whale's performance. And I think Whale did he did The Invisible Man as well, so he did 2 of the 6.
Yeah,
he created and crafted 2 of the most iconic horror figures in memory. The Invisible Man is still going now. We just had a movie a couple years ago, so it's nice to see that he's gotten that kind of respect and resurgence as a filmmaker. It's maybe too little too late, but those of us who know him well.
If you're a fan of Brendan Fraser, I recommend checking this movie out. It's one of his that's kind of not really an outlier, but it doesn't really fit the whole format, filmography.
Yeah.
Because you think, George of the Jungle and all the, Dudley Do-Rights.
Well, like I said, I think this movie would make a great double. If you're in a Fraser mood and you want to celebrate his Oscar win, I think this would make a good pairing with something like School Ties. Because they do show those dramatic ranges, but the films also have... The Whale is heavy. These have a little bit less heavy than The Whale, but still heaviness. Yeah. Or, like I said before, doubling down and watching this after seeing Shadow of the Vampire, I think this is a nice palate cleanser from that straightforward horror. And that also features great performances from people that would become bigger later. So.
What if Max Schreck really was a vampire?
That's so good.
John Malkovich was really directing.
Well, this is really what if James Whale's Gardner was really a monster that he could control. So I guess we have that.
So, agree, disagree with us, please put a comment down below. If there's another Brendan Fraser movie you'd like us to talk about, put a comment down below. What did you also think of this movie? Should we do a James Whale movie? There's a lot of different avenues you can take with us to keep the conversation going.
Yeah, and without looking at the internet, I got a quiz for you guys. We've talked about The Bad and the Beautiful, and we've talked about Gods and Monsters, but there's one other film that shares the distinction with them of being the only 3 films in history who ever won the Adapted Screenplay Oscar without getting a Best Picture nomination. Let me know what the third one is down in the comments.
Oh, my God, that's going to be
If you
tough.
get it right, maybe we'll see if you can get an episode of the show. Don't look it up. You know. Anyway, let us know what you guys thought.
Oh, it can't be Crash. Oh.
And thank you guys for joining us so very much. You can find all of my film reviews over at goatfilmreviews.com.
Hey, guys, once again, I host the show, the St. Paul Filmcast, where I've interviewed local filmmakers from the Twin Cities area. So check that out anywhere you find podcasts. And he's the gods, so I'm the M.